we seem to have the best success.
I actually haven't
So
used that yet.
I like how you're wearing Project Purple. I'm wearing NYRR.
We got the backdrop.
I got the backdrop. Yeah, it looks good. I brought it here to the house to have like Studio 2 here in the house, and we're live with Coach John. We are streaming live, John. I think we're good, man. I think we are good. Awesome. We're live. Love
All
it.
right.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us here on our YouTube channel, John. This is wild. Like, who would have thought like 6 weeks ago that we would be where we are today?
Yeah, it's amazing. Even just, I mean, on one hand, 6 weeks is not a long time, but obviously, on the other hand, it's really long. So
Yeah.
each week is new changes, new surprises, the new normal, and just the evolution of the whole reaction and where the landscape of where we are, and people being a little more creative, but also having to figure out different channels that work best in this environment.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to me. I was just on the phone with a good friend of ours, someone you know well, Terrence from Back on
Oh
My
yeah,
Feet. And
excellent.
yeah, he'll be calling you. I threw out your name, so I think it reminded him to give you a call. But so we were talking just about some things on the fundraising side, and just how like there's this big pivot that's happening, and I think just culturally and socially, like everyone is pivoting, right? Like we kind of have to, I guess, like or we just sit at home.
Right. Yeah, you feel like I mean, I'm like you. I'm a doer, and like you got your hand in all these things, and starting your own business, and same on my end, and kids, and I mean, now you're dealing with. I mean, my kids aren't school age yet, but your
Yeah,
kids are. I think the last time we spoke was probably 4 weeks ago,
yeah,
and yeah, even it's nuts how everything has changed, and then just being. I've found that even just my morning, I do 2 morning runs a week that are live on Instagram Live, and to be honest, I'm getting more out of that than probably others because it gives me structure. Those are 2 days of the week where I know I'm getting out of the house early because I know I don't care if one person's tuning in. It's the accountability piece, which I feel like it's easy just to like sleep in, especially if you don't have a job, well, employment, but also employment workload is probably less depending on the industry. And then you're not really allowed to go outside other than to get some groceries or to get a walk in or a jog. So it's definitely it's interesting to see how everyone's kind of dealing with it and how it changes. And but I think people crave community, like I know runners do. And then we're in an environment now that's kind of been taken away from us to a big degree, and definitely feel a little stir crazy.
just a bit, man, just a bit. So I want to talk about that because I know early on, we had you on the podcast about 4 weeks ago, and we talked about like, hey, tips to stay active right now, also stay safe. I don't think from that standpoint much has changed. I mean, I know here in Connecticut, and we're kind of following suit. You're in Brooklyn, but New York has kind of been the leader in safety in terms of face masks. Now, as of yesterday, which was Monday, the 20th, if my math is correct, yeah, the 20th of April, Connecticut went at 8 p.m. Everyone in public now has to have a face mask. New York has had that guideline, I think, for a couple weeks now. So you're talking about community, and I know you've done some things on Instagram with your involvement with November Project. So let's talk a little bit about that. Like, what's going on? Because yesterday I saw you went live with two people from like some other area in New York, I think, right? Is that
Yeah, well,
correct?
that was actually this morning. I do Off the
Oh,
Hook
this
Track
morning.
Club, which is a new hats finally came in, which is were winter hats, but with the delay from wherever they were coming from, I gotta get you one of these.
Oh,
Uh,
that's awesome.
but I keep that. That's my 6:30, and that's a workout for me. But there's a group on the Upper East Side that does interval training or speed work in Central Park. And when I moved to Brooklyn 4 years ago, I started doing it at Red Hook, and we called it Off the Hook Track Club because we're in Brooklyn. We have to be cool and have a cool name and make T-shirts and stuff. But I just keep that the same. Instead of going to Red Hook, I have a kind of a mini campaign called like Run Your Block, because I'm not trying to encourage everyone to go to the park at once because that's not great either. But just go outside and sprint your block a couple times. You're not too far away. and 1 or 2 or 3 miles just to kind of let off some speed, some steam. It's not even about fitness, although that's a big part of it. So that's every Tuesday. In the last 5 weeks, I've done that via Instagram Live, where I just go live. And the first week I did that, it was just me. And I felt like it would work better if I had someone like a co-pilot. Like if you and I were going to work out together, we have our banter and people can tune in. And it was really just about the accountability piece of like kicking it off. Like I didn't, unless you're drinking coffee or you're in your bed just checking us out, it wasn't really meant for you to follow along on your workout. It's more like do your own workout. We do drills, do your variation of your block because everyone's block is different. And as far as like, hills and length. But the last 4 weeks, I've actually got a co-pilot. And today I had April and Aubrey are a mother-son team from Harlem Run. And I met April through my running group, which is called Tuesday Speed Work on the Upper East Side, probably 6+ years ago. So they did a workout. They ran their block. I ran my block. And it was more of just keeping the routine of Tuesday is speed work. And so it's not at Red Hook. It's not in Central Park necessarily or Prospect Park. But you could still do a variation of it. You can be very creative. And even with Strava and some of the other platforms out there, you can kind of gamify it where I made my block a Strava segment. And I'm like I have the course record because no one's running down my block that fast.
So hold on. How do you make it a Strava segment, or what?
You can you have to do it on the Strava laptop version. You can't do it on your phone. But any route you run, so you can go. There's a couple steps, and it took me a little while to figure out, but it's because I'm 44, and I'm sure your sons can figure it out pretty quickly. But yeah, you can just kind of measure out a segment of your run. And if you're trying to get your block, for example, you run your block, and then you carve out. Easiest way to do it is just run your block and that's your run. That's an easy way to do it because it's the whole run is the segment. But typically I'll go run. And I do this when I was out in Shelter Island where my wife's family has house because it was a new environment for me. It wasn't a lot of segments out there because it's not as populated as New York City or Brooklyn. And I just kind of made up routes. So I kind of came up with my course from like where we live and obviously out here. And you can make a segment and then you kind of can challenge yourself where you're the king of your block or the queen of your block. And again, I've made a couple segments where I actually get emails saying, "Oh, your course record was just taken," and I get all fired up. I don't have that many, especially here in the city. There's a lot of faster runners. Whereas in Shelter Island, I could get away with maybe, or my block, I can get up literally right out here is my block. But yeah, you can create segments, and that's just being creative. So just challenge yourself and. So you don't have to go to a track. You don't have to go to your typical route where maybe you have things measured out, but you can just run your block. And that's kind of what I do on Tuesdays. That's what you saw today. And then last week I had Brogan Graham, who was the co-founder of the Member Project, was my co-pilot from Minneapolis. So he was an hour behind, but we did 10 times 400 on one of the streets nearby. And he was on a bike or running path in Minneapolis. And then it's just a fun way to kind of, I connect for an hour during my workout with someone. Other people tune in. And what I usually do is the person I co-pilot with, say you and I do a workout, I'll say, "Hey, Dina, there was 133 people that checked in during our run. Pick a number from 1 to 33. 133, you picked 78. What do you call it? When you check on who's viewed, Instagram kind of just cues it. I don't know if it's random or by – and I just go to 78 and I give them, and they raffle off, I'll raffle off like stuff from my basement. There's the extra incentive to kind of like, hey, connect, gamify it a little bit. But yeah, it's just, again, part of it's actually on Tuesday and Wednesdays, because I do a Wednesday run too. I call it a community solo run, which is kind of like kind of an oxymoron. But I just go out for like 40 minutes in Prospect Park and people can tune in and say hi. And it's really just, it does help me out maybe more than the people tuning in, but it's all about the structure and trying to keep some normalcy on things we can control, which is less and less these days.
Yeah, but I think, just from listening here you talk, John, I mean, I think the one cool thing, there's actually 2 cool points that I'll make here is, one is you're staying active and having that accountability, which I think right now, and I went through this where you can easily get into a really bad rut and think like, oh, it's vacation. Like kids think like there's no school. Well, there actually is school. It's just different. It's homeschooled, right? And people can get into really bad ruts. So, but then I also think, and this is where, we were talking before, I think we hit record here and we went live. I was talking to Terrence, who runs Back on My Feet. And, we were talking about pivoting, and this might be, something here where we're pivoting here in terms of interaction. And I've said this often, especially with our patient community, but even as people here, we are told to socially distance ourselves, stay at home, when you're out in public, stay within 6 feet, but it is not social isolation. And right. I think, granted, hopefully we do get back to the days where, we can run as a group and we can do things as a group, functions, birthdays, parties, celebrations, those kinds of things. But I think really in this time, it's really critical for us as human beings, not just as athletes here or runners, is to really have some sort of social interaction. And I think a lot of people, hindsight's always going to be 2020, but I think in 6 months or whenever we come out of this, whatever that time is, hopefully it's in 2 months or in a month for some people, that we don't have this large negative impact of being socially isolated mentally and also physically. That's what I kind of fear a bit.
Yeah, I think actually on one hand, I also think that everyone's so used to like homeschooling now, or even if they're getting better at it, that it even like I had a doctor appointment the other day, like you're my doctor, we're just talking. And I think some of that will, like people that now either had that platform and didn't utilize it or are now utilizing it or had to figure it out, they might, maybe 5% of their business or 10% of their business is still kind of in this format. So I think that's kind of, I think one thing we'll see on, since people have figured this out and it's not so scary, or the school, if someone's home from school, maybe they can, they know how to log on and see a lesson or something. So I think there'll be some positive out of that as far as kind of whether it's homeschooling for, vacation or something, or, someone breaks their leg and, a kid breaks their leg and on a ski trip and they're out 2 weeks and they can utilize some of the platforms that they have to use now. And even with doctors and, I guess businesses and conference calls have always been, but not so much the whole Zoom face-to-face. And even on outside of running, in 2 days, Thursday is my wedding anniversary. We're married 4 years. And we're like, again, 4 years is not like 5 or 10. Like it's just, kind of like whatever. But we're going to do a Zoom happy hour with my family and like immediate friends, like wedding party people. I'm going to put on my tux. My wife's going to put on her wedding dress. And we're going to send out a Zoom link and say, hey, it'd be probably a nightmare to try to talk to everyone that kind of jumps down for 5 or 10 minutes, but just to see us in our wedding gear, just to, wedding outfits, to remember, that last 4 years ago, that was fun. We were all there, and we're not sure who's going to pop on and pop off. And
that's so cool.
I'm probably going to send some like surprise guest links. So my wife's not expecting so-and-so to just pop on. And it's just one of these things where you see people getting married. Our wedding day is come and gone. Screw it. We're gonna get married online and like Zoom in. So it's definitely interesting how people are trying to keep things going a little bit, even though like my son was supposed to be baptized last month, and again that's an easy shift. We just do it whenever we can do it. But getting married,
there's no virtual baptisms.
I know. Well, we were joking that like someone joked about having like a power soaker, those big guns. The priest can come by and just kind of open up the window.
Well, or if it's a Roman Catholic faith, naturally they have those the water splash.
Yeah, so
maybe he could just come to the sidewalk and just like toss the water on top of the baby's head and just you gotta have to like hold the baby. It's Emmett, right?
Yeah, it's Emmett.
Yeah, just like guide Emmett to get hit with the water, I guess. That would be kind of fun.
So we could do that. But even that, April and Aubrey, who joined me this morning from our interval workout, Aubrey's a senior in high school. I'm picturing my senior year in high school. Our spring season, we were national champs in the 4x8. I was committing to St. John's University on a full ride, prom, graduation.
All these things.
That's like, I mean, people that are freshmen or seniors in college, that's tricky too. But I just feel like senior in high school, or even not in college, your spring season, outdoor track and field canceled, the cross canceled,
baseball all canceled. It's crazy. It's crazy. I wonder again, like in years, maybe like this whole student population that didn't get to experience these things, like prom or like graduation. I mean, I guess there's an argument to be made about the importance of a prom, but I think graduation, like, that's such a tremendous feat, collegiately and also from a high school standpoint, academically. I mean, some
Right.
people may never be in an academic setting ever again. They may just go straight to the workforce, which is fantastic. But like to not have that
Right.
moment of celebration or to be recognized for all the hard work you've done for 12 years, it's crazy.
Even that, you think of like, you often hear these stories where, oh, I'm the first kid to graduate college from in my family. You
Yeah.
know, I'm a little bit different because my grandfather went to Notre Dame and my dad played tennis in Notre Dame. So yeah, if I missed out on my graduation, I would be bummed too. But you hear these stories where it's the first kid in a certain family that graduates, and this is what it is. It's like virtual graduation, or you get a
Yeah.
diploma in the mail, and those things are kind of strange to think about.
Yeah, it's crazy. We're in a crazy, crazy time. So let's get back to running. Other than like, what you're doing right now, is there anything else that you're implementing? And the only reason why I bring this up is we've talked to some runners. I know we talked a little bit about this on the podcast, and there's so much uncertainty with these fall marathons. Unfortunately, before we got on this call, I don't know if you saw the notice, but Berlin just did cancel.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, this morning. I guess what had happened, and don't quote me as an expert, but I did just read on the Berlin Marathon page that per the government mandating that any large gatherings be canceled or postponed. I think it was up to like 5,000 people up through October 24th. Berlin is in September, end of September. So unfortunately, it looks like Berlin is a no-go this year, unless they decide to move that timetable back to like October 24th, which I think London is in October now. And so like, I don't know how that plays out. And, I
Right.
think, now we used to have such a small window for running these large races, because of the climates and the locations. And now you went from like maybe like a 4-month window where you would have 2 months in the spring, 2 months in the fall, to like a 1-month window where potentially you could have like all these major races within like a month, which is crazy.
Yeah, it was. I think with Berlin, including Berlin, there's 5 majors in 7 weeks.
Yeah.
And actually, I was on a call yesterday because I've been last year or so. I got involved with the Shelter Island 10K, which is about 2,000 runners. It's it's solid size. It's on in between the North and South Fork of Long Island. It's actually where my wife's family has a house, and they've had it for a while. And I go out there a lot, so I got involved with the race, and so now I'm on these calls. We were on the call with the police chief out there, and obviously we're focusing on what guidelines of the government. Cuomo is talking about, but we're a 2,000 person race, and if it's a cap of 500 or 1,000, and how that affects the volunteers and how that affects medical, which again for that size of a race it's not a big deal, but for any major marathon, I mean, it's one thing if things are lifted and there's some normalcy. There'll be some people that won't want to compete because of they're not comfortable, which is legit. And then there's, even if everyone wanted to, people that are chomping at the bit. Like, how safe is that to have? It's not like it's a turkey trot that's or 5K to raise money for your local cancer charity. Those are a little bit kind of mom and pops for the most part. You can kind of maybe do a quick wave thing. We were talking about doing 2 or 3 waves of just that to keep that in, but a larger scale races, the travel involved. This is a race that it's mostly Long Island and New York City going to it. Yeah. So look at any major marathon, people are traveling to get there, and then the volunteers and the medical and the other stresses, which are worth it because it's a great day and economic impact. And there's reasons to have the race other than just the medal. There's lots of positives that come out of it that aren't just running related, just economics and all that. But even New York City Marathon, I mean, the Brooklyn half just got finally canceled, which was a foregone conclusion. I think they were just waiting for some city sign-offs because there's probably insurance and other implications on how they absorb that race being canceled with some of their 9+1 or refunds and other things that they have to figure out. They're 4 out of 6 with their borough races, and so that's through May 16th. I mean, November doesn't seem that far away, and for 53,000 runners, I mean,
yeah, it'll be interesting to say the least. And unfortunately, I think as we said on the podcast, this is such a fluid situation, right? And I think you as runners, and you and I, and also for the audience at large that's watching, that potentially are in one of these races, even for Boston for that matter, any of these fall marathons, I think we just have to be able to pivot a bit, because I think that you got to have maybe, if running is your ultimate goal, um, you got to have a backup plan, I guess I would say. Some of these races you can't because, unfortunately, Boston is a qualifier. Berlin, you had to register. London, you had to register. New York, you can still probably get spots. Chicago, you can still get spots. But I think it may be, if you were looking to do, Boston or London, your luck is probably run out in that case. But so it's so fluid at this time. There's so many unknowns, I think, and so it's hard to kind of speculate too, John. I think as well. I think we have told our runners we rely on the race directors and the race organizations themselves to communicate what's going on, and we haven't heard anything from any of them other than that the races are on.
Yeah, even that we talked about last night at the Shelter Island 10K. As now it's on, but it's fluid. We're going to have a meeting in a month because that race is Father's Day weekend. So we still have some time. And again, it is a smaller race, but that's a race where there's a couple hundred people signed up for. So if we had to cap it at 1,000 or 500, we could still do that. But if you're a New York Marathon, those spots, it's also the 50th anniversary, as you know, where everyone wants.
I know.
Now, if it doesn't happen, next year will be the 50th. So that still happens in a way, but I'm sure that this is just an extra layer with New York, with the fact that there was such a hype about it being the 50th. But obviously, like people being healthy and is the number one priority. And I do think we'll have even if it's a mini running boom out of this, because people not being able to go to the gyms and CrossFit and all these other things, they're kind of forced to walk or jog.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think right away, even if New York Marathon happened, I think there might be less people out spectating. And even though it's my favorite day of the year in New York City, but I don't know when it will normalize and whatever the new normal is, but I think there will be a surge in running when things kind of get back to normal. I just don't know when I think the timeline is a moving target, and time will tell with that, but it's definitely uncharted times, and it's interesting. You have people comparing us to the issue, the pandemic in 1918. like
we weren't even around. Like how it's so hard
I don't even want to talk to how that was.
Yeah, it's so hard to comprehend. What are you seeing, John? I got to bring this up because I saw your post, I think this morning. You typically run in Prospect Park, as you mentioned, which is close by your home. Are people out and about? I've seen pictures, and again, the media, I think, has a great way. Like there was, and I'll preface this by saying, like, I saw like Florida open their beaches the other day, and I saw something on Facebook which showed like thousands of people, and then the day later someone posted like, hey, this was actually what it looked like. And
right.
ABC, I think, was don't quote me on this, I'm not, don't take me here for word here, but I don't know which television station, but they did say that they made a mistake because they got called out, that they used an older picture of people, thousands of people congregated on the beach, and technically there was like 10 people on the beach, and the beach was miles long. So yeah, have people been abiding by the rules in Prospect Park? Because I've seen pictures of people that it's been active.
Yeah, that's why even after my workout this morning, which was on my block, I'm 2 blocks from Prospect Park. So I just jogged over there on my cool down just to kind of check it out. It was 7:21 because I took a 30-second video and I posted it on my Instagram. Hey, if you're looking to run in Prospect Park, this is what it looks like. I find actually that it's probably the same thing with Central Park and maybe some parks near you. It's very easy to run the loop. Prospect Park, I don't know if we talked about this, but the most trafficked or the most run Strava segment in the world is Prospect Park, the 3.4 mile loop. I think Central Park it's too long. It's 6 miles is a lot for the average Joe to go out there and run it. So I think it's more about the size of the park, and obviously Brooklyn's populated, but so is Manhattan. So, but the perimeter of the park is very quiet. Which is a little bit longer, but everyone runs in the park. So some of my running buddies, like we've suggested, we do that anyway, and it's just It's like no one's around. I've been in the park I've done some things where I started a thing called Share Your Sunrise, where, some people, whether they're sick in bed, they're on the front lines, they're delivering groceries, they're out delivering mail, whatever their schedule is, don't have access, or they're just kind of cooped up in their house. They don't have access to a sunrise. I'm 2 blocks from the park. There's a beautiful lake over there. There's a decent sunrise when there's not cloud cover. I went out there and I just kind of Instagram lived the sun coming up. It was kind of a hashtag share your sunrise kind of thing. I went on a run afterwards, but it wasn't a running thing. More just simple as that. And super quiet. There's almost no cyclists in the park because they often, we talked about this last time. They usually are like packed up in 10 or 20 zipping around. And that's obviously a no-no. So you'll see the solo cyclists, and then you'll see runners either by themselves or with a buddy or a household buddy or roommate or who knows. And they're usually, and it's pretty easy to run. I actually was tempted to take my family when they get up at 6:30 or 7 just to go there because there's no real families hanging out.
Yeah.
In the afternoon, I've done some walks with luckily my son is 6 months old, so I have him in the carrier, and my daughter's either in a stroller or walking around, and we go just inside Prospect Park, and there's a bunch of grass just beyond on the outside of the loop. And I can, we're chasing birds and we're collecting rocks and stuff. It's actually pretty good. But I've done that the last couple of days, anywhere from 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock. And definitely between 5 and 6, it's packed. Like there's definitely a bunch of cyclists out there, mostly actually like the city bike, kind of more casual, not the competitive training. Actually yesterday I was out in the park and I saw this whole family of like 6 or 7 people walking in the bike lane. And I was like, that's not that safe because people are zipping around, and I don't know if you know, it's probably the same in Central Park. There's the bike lane, the fast bike lane, the slow bike lane, and then the runners. And I'm like, that's a disaster waiting to happen. And just people who are not used to the park etiquette are now, and there's obviously talk about closing some of the streets, like summer streets in the summer, because these people are just on top of each other and there's not a lot of places to go. So I've definitely seen parts of the park where if I have to run in the afternoon or evening, I don't even go to the park. I just go to the side roads and I get 2 or 3 miles in, and I'm not doing a lot of volume. And you can actually run in the street because it's not a lot of car traffic. Obviously you want to be safe. But there's definitely times in the park where I'm like, this seems a little bit, I ran last week and I didn't want to shame anyone because, it's just not right. But there seemed to be a bunch of dog walkers just kind of hanging out. Like it was like a typical Wednesday morning. And I'm like, this seems like it's a little too close for comfort, especially when you got animals and they're off leash and they're running around and start arguing and they start barking at each other. And then you have to get involved, and you're forced to kind of be within 6 feet. So I've definitely seen my share of that, but there's definitely times where it's pretty empty. And I say, if you're a runner, go early. And another thing is back to the social isolation you're talking about. Even talking to Mitchell Silver, who's the New York City Parks Commissioner, who's a big runner, he's like, you can, and I'm big on runner safety, as you know. Everyone's saying run alone, run solo, but there is an extra risk there, especially if it's dark in the evening or in the morning, where I haven't heard anything luckily, but if you're on your own in the dark, there might be a little more risks out there, whether it's getting mugged or whatever, or even tripping, and or getting hit by a bike or a bus or something. If they don't see you don't have the right reflective gear on. So you can run with someone. You just have to be, and in the morning,
6 feet,
you can run with someone, but just don't be near them. And then and if you're passing some other people that are also bunched up, but in the morning, even in Prospect Park, you just get up early and you're actually okay. But in the afternoon, I've definitely seen firsthand a little too close for comfort, I think.
Well, I think you said something, and I know we talked about this on the podcast, but we should reiterate here on the live video here is just the rules of engagement. And like I went running this past weekend, and I usually try to stay here in my local area. I can get, up to 13 miles if I needed to. And like you said, I like to get up early, get it done. There's less people out there. There's less motor traffic. Like we don't have a very good trail system here where I live. So I've got to drive about 10 minutes if I really want to get to a trail system where, there's no cars at all. There's just people on bikes or walking. And then wildlife is probably the biggest thing that we have to worry about here, more so than you in the city. But I think the one thing for those watching and those who will watch after, is just the rules of safety. Like, especially here in Connecticut, when you're running on streets, and even in New York, you always should be going opposite traffic, right? So like if you're running, you don't want the cars coming from behind you,
Right.
because God forbid someone's texting, you don't see that person. And this goes for running, walking, bicycling, you're always going with traffic. Running and walking, you're always going opposite. But it's fascinating, like you just said before, like a lot of people are running. There's a lot of new runners just because of the reality of the situation. You can't go to gyms, you're stressed out. It's free, it's easy to do, it's great. We love all those reasons, right? Other than you can't get to the gym because we don't want businesses to close. But I think just know the rules and the safety. And also too, I saw some guys this weekend, not together, but separate, that had headphones on that weren't going the right way. And that's even like the kiss of death as well, because now you can't even hear a car coming behind you, because you got headphones in. So you got to be really cautious. I think that's the one thing. And I love what you said about Mitchell Silver, because last weekend I went on a long run, and even here locally, I saw a group of women. There were 5 women, and they were actually running in a big pack. And what do we mean by that? They were spread out, 4 or 5 feet. They're not bunched together, but they're running here in the suburbs in a pack. But, their pack was probably 3 times the normal size, just because of the rules and regulations.
Yeah, I think we talked about this in one of our last podcasts about Runner Safety Awareness Week, and the number one tip for that is run with groups. And I always say I don't want people to not run by themselves, because I do my best thinking, and so that shouldn't be the only answer to runner safety. Now in this environment, everyone's saying run by yourself, run by yourself, so that you can't even run with packs or with a running group. And so, but that doesn't mean you have to run by yourself. So don't want people to be, if they're itching to run and they don't know, there's ways of figuring out that, but you can run with, I would say run with one person versus 3 or 4, just because it makes it easier, especially when you're passing people. But don't run outside alone if you're not comfortable. And that's, don't, and then find a buddy, whether it's in your household, which is, you could actually don't have to be 6 feet. Obviously, if your roommate or your spouse, you're already kind of quarantined with them, you can obviously go for a run together, or one of your kids, if they're of age, to run a couple miles with you. That's obviously, although it's funny because I've definitely seen each week more and more people like getting out of the way on the sidewalk, more masks for sure. Yeah. But you see a group of people, like we actually, my sister-in-law and brother-in-law live upstairs from us. So we're kind of one household. So every other day we're out on the front porch, maybe having a beer, maybe just kind of getting the sun. And you definitely wonder, people walk by and it's like, oh, look at these 4 people, not social
distance. They're partying, yeah.
No, we're one household. We live together. We're roommates. So, no one said anything, but it does creep into your mind. You're like, I wonder like what the perception is, because you might see a group and be like, maybe they're 4 roommates, but So,
well, I think the rule of thumb, though, and correct me if I'm wrong, I thought in New York and even here in Connecticut, it's like a gathering of 5. Is like you can't have any more than 5 people, I think, is what the rule is.
I think it's about that.
I don't know the legalities of that. I don't know the technical aspects of it, but I think it's 5. So you might be good with 4 on the porch. If you had 2 more, then you're definitely out of compliance, let's say, John.
I know. And we have our 2 kids. So it's like,
there you go.
We're at 6 now.
Yeah.
So
I got one more thing for you, and something that I think I caught with you, and I think this might be cool to share with our watchers too, is new adventures is what I have written down here. And I think you explored a little bit. I think it could have been you going to like Red Hook and just like kind of, I think you posted some really cool pictures and like areas of like, I mean, I've been in the city. I go there so often for the last like 40 years, let's say. I've never been to Red Hook, but seeing those pictures, I was like, wow, that's really cool. And I've heard of Red Hook, I've run the marathon 3 times, never seen any of those pictures. So I think my point here is just new areas to explore. And again, keeping in mind with safety that we just talked about, you want to be safe. You don't want to go with a group. But I think it's a really cool time to kind of explore some new areas.
Yeah. And to be honest, I've only been running a couple miles a day. I was actually, when we talked last, I was coming off of a cold. I wasn't sure if it was Corona, I couldn't even get tested because this was like a month ago. They're like, if you have it, you have to stay home anyway, as long as you don't have symptoms where you need a respirator or something. It's like, just stay home. So I was doing that. So I wasn't really running much. But then, I've obviously felt better. I felt better the last 2 weeks. I'm getting out more, and I want to go on for 2 or 3 miles because I want to stay near the house. And if I'm not going to the park, I'm just I don't want to run too much on just the middle of the road. But this weekend I was itching to go I felt up for it. And I went for like 6 or 7 miles, which allowed me to go to Red Hook and run around there. And it's such a great part of the city. You can actually run along the water over there. Even there's an IKEA there, which is not that glamorous, but waterfront next to it. And you can actually go. I actually went there with my daughter and wife and my son. We went there because I ran by there on, say, Saturday morning. And I'm like, oh, wow, like people are driving to IKEA. It's not open. It's not, I mean, when I say people, there's 10 cars. But you can park. And there's a beautiful waterfront with all these art exhibits that are nautical themed, like ropes from ships and stuff. And it was not well populated, which is good. And there's plenty of parking. And we just kind of walked around and explored. So definitely don't want to explore new places in the dark, but in broad daylight, and if there's a place it definitely is an opportunity where go explore a little bit for sure. But yeah, I posted about 10 pictures on my Instagram, and I actually had trouble picking the top 10 because you only can post 10. Yeah. Because I was, and I know Red Hook fairly well. I'm not running through there. I mean, I run on the track every Tuesday, but that's at the Red Hook track. That's not, a lot of the pictures I took weren't of the track. There were different spots, but it's a great little spot to explore. And I'm sure there's neighborhoods that you've always heard of or runs that you've heard of that you just haven't had the time to do. So if it's safe and you can social distance on those routes, and it's daylight for sure, I definitely recommend, even if it doesn't even have to be on a run, it could be on a walk, for sure.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. I've seen some other runners too go like north a little bit. I mean, I know New York, there's a couple areas, like there's the West Side Highway, which takes you up to the bridge, to the GW. And then, there's the East River. I think there's some paths there too. So it's just really cool. I mean, again, keeping safety in mind and not doing anything, that's not safe. I think this is a great time to explore, some new runs, some new hikes, some new walks. I know here in Connecticut, they have had some issues, unfortunately, here in Connecticut with some of the state parks just being overcrowded.
Right.
But there's plenty of trail systems that are actually not state parks, especially in my part of the woods, or I should say in my neck of the area here in Connecticut. There's a lot of woods, but there's a lot of trails that have been carved out by towns and local communities that may not be suited to run, but just to get out and the weather's turned a bit, we've had some warmer temperatures, and that's a good mental release and also physical. So definitely.
Yeah, I also think though there could be some more crowds with the nicer weather coming in the park. So curious to see if they do close down some of the Manhattan streets like they did for Summer Streets, because even actually I went to the Greenwood Cemetery for a couple walks, and it was like really quiet there. It's beautiful if you've ever been. We're only a couple blocks from it. But even on Sunday, we drove by it, and it seemed a lot busier. Maybe because word got out. Yeah. It's like, I posted some photos, and
that's actually not a bad idea.
So you can't run. Typically, you can't run in a cemetery because it's like not respectful. But you can
correct
walk. And if you're in Brooklyn, they actually opened up all the entrances because I think there's 7 different entrances. It's pretty big. Yeah. But just make sure you might want to go on a rainy day, to be honest, because actually when it rains, especially the new runners, that are people that they're not going to, most likely are not going to go out. They might not have the gear. So I've noticed that if it's windy or cold at all or rainy, that's when you should run, because, obviously if it's safe and you're not trying to, if it's not too dark, but there's the new runners aren't going to be typically going out in that weather because they're just not used to it. And if you're really looking for some solidarity in your running, which a lot of us are, go when the weather's not ideal. And I think just for obvious reasons, you'll have less. But I've definitely noticed that and been like, you and I, we can go out and run when it's raining. It's not like a big deal.
Oh, it's great. I went last week. It was actually snowing here in Connecticut, I think on Saturday or Friday. And I went out early in the morning, and it was snowing. I mean, it wasn't sticking on the ground, so it wasn't that kind of snow, but it was, but there were no cars, there was no one out. It was great. Those are sometimes the best runs, when it's like that, when the elements aren't so great. And I just had like a poncho on top, and I wore a hat, a baseball hat, like a running cap, so that stuff would stay out of my eyes, which worked well. So, well, John, thank you for coming on our YouTube channel here and sharing some thoughts right now. This is just a super fluid and crazy and just hopefully we never have to relive this experience ever. And sharing some thoughts about running and all you're doing for our community and for the community as a large in terms of running. So be safe out there, and hopefully we have you back on here soon to talk about more of training. Once the dust settles, I know there's going to be a lot of runners that are going to need training and need to get into that mode sooner than later. Because as you said, November is going to be here before we know it. And September will be here and October will be here before we know it as well. And so we're going to have to start training. I mean, we're April 21st, June is Global Running Day, which we hope happens. And that's really kind of the start of all these fall marathon trainings.
Yeah. And with Berlin, taking a pause there. We'll see how that affects the other world majors and other races. But yeah, I mean, safety is the first priority and we're all in this together. And so, we all love the race and we miss it. But I think I even posted yesterday about Boston saying there's no race in Boston today, but there will be at some point.
Yeah.
So, look forward to that. And, focus on, family and being safe. And it's great that we can still go out and run. The races are canceled, but for the most part, we can go out and run. We don't have to run on our balcony. We don't have to. And a buddy of mine, Chris England, just ran a marathon on his roof yesterday in honor of Boston. So I think I'd get too dizzy, but yeah, it's key to have perspective here and try not to go too stir crazy. But I know that's easier said than done sometimes. I find my ebbs and flows of like, what it definitely feels like Groundhog's Day for sure. It's like there is no weekend because you're not doing. I'm not doing a ton of work during the week, and and the kids are around, so that's the same. So you're craving for that weekend kind of. Every day seems like the weekend in a way, but not in a good way. So we're trying to, things are shifting a little bit, but just see how they shift and how they unfold of what the new normal is and how quickly we get there in the way that's safe for everyone.
I agree, man. Can't wait for better days. John, be safe and thanks again for your time.
You got it.
Take care, buddy.